Welcome to DCF Investigations. London, 1888. The very name of the city in this specific year conjures images that have haunted the collective consciousness of the world for over a century. It is a scene painted in shades of charcoal and blood. The fog, thick and yellow, known colloquially as a pea souper, clings to the cobblestones, obscuring the gas lamps that flicker like dying stars against the overwhelming darkness. This is the East End. This is Whitechapel. It is a place where hope goes to die and where a monster was born. We are about to embark on a journey into the heart of the Autumn of Terror, a period of mere weeks that redefined the concept of fear and gave birth to the modern age of criminal investigation. We will walk the terrifyingly narrow alleyways, examine the forensic evidence with the benefit of hindsight, and look into the eyes of every man accused of being the phantom known as Jack the Ripper. To truly understand these crimes, we must first understand the stage upon which they were set. Whitechapel in the late Victorian era was not merely a poor district. It was a humanitarian crisis. It was the dumping ground for the British Empire's unwanted. The population density was suffocating, with nearly 80,000 people packed into a labyrinth of dilapidated tenements and lodging houses. These common lodging houses, or doss houses, were the last refuge for the destitute. For 4 pence, one could rent a coffin-like wooden box to sleep in. For 2 pence, one could sleep leaning against a rope stretched across a room. This was the world the victims inhabited. It was a transient, desperate existence, where alcohol was the only anesthetic against the cold and the hunger. It is estimated that in this small quarter alone, there were over 1,200 prostitutes and 62 brothels. But these were not brothels in the sense of organized establishments. These were women forced by dire circumstance to sell themselves in dark corners, in backyards, and in the shadow of church walls, simply to earn the price of a bed or a glass of gin. It was against this backdrop of misery that the first blow was struck. While there is debate among historians regarding the true number of victims, the canonical 5 are the ones that bear the unmistakable signature of the Ripper. The first was Mary Ann Nichols, known to her friends as Polly. Polly was 43 years old, a mother of 5 whose life had unraveled due to a broken marriage and a struggle with alcoholism. On the night of August 31st, 1888, Polly was turned away from a lodging house on Thrall Street because she lacked 4 pence for a bed. She laughed it off, telling the deputies she would soon have the money, pointing to her new bonnet as a sign of her optimism. It was the last time she was seen alive. At 3:40 in the morning, a carman named Charles Cross was walking to work through Buck's Row. He saw what looked like a bundle of tarpaulin lying in front of a gated stable entrance. Upon closer inspection, he realized it was a woman. Her skirt was raised. Her throat had been slashed so deeply that the head was almost severed. The brutality of the Nichols murder sent a shockwave through the police force. But it was only the beginning. The killer was not just a murderer. He was a mutilator. When the police surgeon examined Polly Nichols, he found that in addition to the throat wound, her abdomen had been cut open with a jagged, violent intensity. This was not a robbery. This was something new, something primal. The press began to take notice, but the streets of Whitechapel swallowed the killer whole. There were no witnesses, no footprints, and in 1888, there was no fingerprinting, no blood typing, and certainly no DNA analysis. The police were fighting a ghost with one hand tied behind their backs. Just over a week later, on September 8th, the horror escalated. Annie Chapman, a 47-year-old widow who had fallen into the hard life of the East End, was found in the backyard of number 29 Hanbury Street. Like Polly Nichols, she had been turned away from a lodging house for lack of funds. She had gone out into the dark morning to earn her keep. Her body was discovered just before 6 in the morning by a resident of the house. The violence inflicted upon Annie Chapman was significantly worse than that visited upon Polly Nichols. Her throat was cut, but the killer had also surgically removed her uterus. This detail is of paramount importance. It suggested to the investigators of the time, and to us today, that the killer possessed some level of anatomical knowledge. He knew where the organs were, and he was able to extract them in near total darkness in a matter of minutes, without damaging the surrounding viscera. The precision terrified the public. Was the killer a doctor, a butcher, a slaughterman? The panic in London reached a fever pitch. Vigilante groups formed, calling themselves the Whitechapel Vigilance Committee, led by a local builder named George Lusk. They hired private detectives and patrolled the streets. But they were powerless against a phantom. The police, led by Inspector Frederick Aberlane, a man who knew the East End better than anyone, were overwhelmed. They interviewed thousands of lodging house residents, followed up on hundreds of false leads, and drafted in reinforcements. But the killer remained elusive. It was during this period of hysteria that the name was born. A letter arrived at the Central News Agency, written in red ink. It was dated September 25th and addressed to Dear Boss. The writer boasted of his crimes, mocked the police, and promised to clip the lady's ears off next time. He signed it, Jack the Ripper. While many historians today believe this letter was a hoax concocted by a journalist to sell papers, it gave the monster a name, and that name fueled the fire of public fascination. Then came the night of the double event. September 30th, 1888. It is the only night the Ripper is believed to have struck twice. The first victim was Elizabeth Stride, a Swedish immigrant known as Long Liz. Her body was found at 1 in the morning in Dutfield's yard, off Burner Street. Her throat had been cut. But unlike the previous victims, there were no abdominal mutilations. The blood was still flowing when she was found. It is highly probable that the killer was interrupted by the arrival of a cart entering the yard. He fled into the night, frustrated, his bloodlust unsated. He did not go into hiding. He went hunting. Less than an hour later, and within walking distance, he found Catherine Eddowes. Catherine had been in police custody earlier that night for drunkenness, but was released from the Bishopsgate police station just as the killer was fleeing the scene of Elizabeth Stride's murder. They crossed paths in Mitre Square, a small enclosed area in the city of London. This time, the killer had time. The mutilations inflicted on Catherine Eddowes were horrific. Her face was disfigured, her throat slashed, and her abdomen laid open. The killer took her left kidney and part of her womb. As the police scoured the area, they found a clue. In a doorway on Goulston Street, a piece of Catherine Eddowes' blood-stained apron was found. Above it, chalked on the wall, was a message. The spelling was poor, but the sentiment was clear. It read, "The Jews are the men that will not be blamed for nothing." This graffito became a point of massive contention. Sir Charles Warren, the Commissioner of the Metropolitan Police, ordered it to be erased before sunrise, fearing it would spark anti-Semitic riots in the already tense East End. This decision destroyed what might have been the only sample of the killer's handwriting. Was the killer Jewish? Was he trying to frame the Jewish community? Or was the writing entirely unrelated? Just a coincidence in a city covered in graffiti? We will never know. The terror continued through October, though the killer went quiet. Then, on November 9th, the crescendo arrived. Mary Jane Kelly was the youngest of the canonical victims, just 25 years old. Unlike the others, she had a room of her own at number 13 Miller's Court. This meant the killer did not have to worry about passing carts or patrolling constables. He had privacy, he had light, and he had time. Mary Jane Kelly's body was discovered the following morning. The scene inside that small room is considered one of the most gruesome in crime history. The killer had virtually destroyed her. He had removed her heart, which was never found. He had skinned parts of her body and arranged her organs around the room in a grotesque display. This was his masterpiece of horror. And then, just as suddenly as he had appeared, Jack the Ripper vanished. There were other murders in Whitechapel in the years that followed, but none bore the distinct, surgical, ritualistic signature of the Ripper. Now, we must turn our gaze to the men who might have been the monster. The list of suspects is vast, ranging from the plausible to the preposterous. We must examine them with the scrutiny they deserve. First, let us look at Montague John Druitt. Druitt was a barrister and a schoolteacher from a good family. He committed suicide by drowning himself in the Thames in December 1888, shortly after the murder of Mary Jane Kelly. A police memorandum from years later named him as a prime suspect, stating that his own family believed him to be the killer. Why? Because the murders stopped after his death. However, there is little concrete evidence linking him to the crimes. He was a gentleman, not a butcher. Modern profilers question whether he fits the chaotic, violent profile of the Ripper. But the timing of his death remains a compelling coincidence. Then there is Aaron Kosminski. Kosminski was a Polish Jew and a hairdresser who lived in Whitechapel. He was known to have serious mental health issues, including auditory hallucinations and a hatred of women. He was committed to an asylum in 1891. Police officials of the time, including Sir Robert Anderson, strongly believed Kosminski was the man. In recent years, Kosminski has returned to the spotlight due to controversial DNA analysis performed on a shawl alleged to have been found near Catherine Eddowes' body. The analysis claimed to find a match between mitochondrial DNA on the shawl and living descendants of both Eddowes and Kosminski. However, the scientific community has largely rejected these findings due to issues with the chain of custody of the shawl and the possibility of contamination. The shawl had been handled by many people over the decades. Still, Kosminski remains one of the most viable suspects due to his proximity, his mental instability, and the suspicions of the police who were on the ground. We must also consider Severin Klosowski, also known as George Chapman. No relation to the victim, Annie Chapman. Klosowski was a Polish surgeon turned barber who lived in the area. He later became a serial killer known as the Borough Poisoner, convicted of poisoning 3 of his wives. Inspector Aberline himself suspected Klosowski. The main argument against him is his modus operandi. Serial killers rarely switch from violent mutilation to the quiet, slow method of poisoning. However, Kosminski was violent, he had medical training, and he was in Whitechapel. Another figure that looms large is Francis Tumblety. Tumblety was an American quack doctor who was in London in 1888. He was an eccentric figure, known for his misogyny and a collection of preserved human organs he kept in jars. He was arrested on unrelated charges of gross indecency during the height of the riots and fled the country, returning to the United States. Scotland Yard even sent officers to America to track him. He fits the profile of someone with a pathological hatred of women and an obsession with organs. But hard evidence placing him at the crime scenes is lacking. There are also the theories that venture into the realm of conspiracy. The most famous of these is the Royal Conspiracy. This theory posits that the killer was Prince Albert Victor, the grandson of Queen Victoria, or that the murders were committed by the royal physician Sir William Gull to cover up a scandal involving the prince, a secret marriage, and an illegitimate child. This theory suggests that the women were murdered because they knew the secret. It involves Freemasons, cover-ups, and high society intrigue. While it makes for a compelling movie plot, as seen in the film From Hell, historians have thoroughly debunked it. Records show the prince was not even in London on the nights of the murders. We must also mention James Maybrick. In the 1990s, a diary surfaced, allegedly written by Maybrick, a cotton merchant from Liverpool. In the diary, he confesses to being the Ripper, describing the murders in detail. However, the provenance of the diary is highly contested, with most experts dismissing it as a modern forgery. Yet, some still cling to the possibility that it is genuine, or at least based on genuine knowledge. Let us step back and look at the investigation itself. Why did they fail? We must remember that in 1888, the concept of a serial killer did not exist. There was no term for it. Police were used to domestic disputes, drunken brawls, and robbery. A motiveless, ritualistic killer was an alien concept. The police force was also divided. The Metropolitan Police and the City of London Police were separate entities, often refusing to share information. The erasing of the graffiti on Goulston Street is a prime example of this jurisdictional friction. Furthermore, the crime scenes were not secured as they are today. Crowds would gather, trampling evidence. Bodies were moved before photographs were taken. In the case of Mary Jane Kelly, the only crime scene photo we have was taken after the body had been manipulated. The media played a massive role in creating the legend. The newspapers of the time were in a circulation war. They sensationalized every detail, printed the letters whether they were real or not, and whipped the public into a frenzy. In many ways, Jack the Ripper was the first media-made monster. The name itself is a masterstroke of branding. Without that name, would we still be talking about the Whitechapel murders today? Perhaps not. We must also analyze the psychological profile of the killer through a modern lens. Today, the FBI would classify Jack the Ripper as a disorganized offender who likely escalated into an organized one. The early attacks on Nichols and Chapman were outdoors, risky, and frenzied. By the time he reached Mary Jane Kelly, he had evolved. He was taking trophies. He was spending time with the bodies. This escalation suggests a deep-seated psychosexual drive. The removal of organs suggests a fetishistic need to possess the victims. He targeted prostitutes, not necessarily because of a moral crusade, but because they were accessible. They were the only women who would willingly go into a dark corner with a stranger. They were targets of opportunity. The legacy of these crimes is profound. The failure to catch the Ripper led to significant changes in policing. It highlighted the need for better forensic science, better record-keeping, and a more centralized police force. It also shone a light on the appalling living conditions in the East End, leading to social reforms and slum clearances. But the darkest legacy is the endurance of the mystery. Jack the Ripper has become a figure of folklore, a boogeyman in a top hat and cape. We often forget that behind the myth were 5 real women: Mary Ann Nichols, Annie Chapman, Elizabeth Stride, Catherine Eddowes, Mary Jane Kelly. They were daughters, wives, and mothers who suffered unimaginable terror. As we stand here today, over a century later, the case remains officially open, though inactive. Every year, a new book is published claiming to have solved the case. A new name is thrown into the ring. A new theory is proposed. But the truth is buried under the London pavement, lost in the smog of the Victorian past. We have the letters, the grainy photographs, and the police reports. But we do not have the man. We have a silhouette, a shadow that moves through the history of crime, untouchable and unknowable. Was he a doctor? A madman? A royal? Or was he simply a nobody? A face in the crowd that you would pass on the street without a second glance? The terrifying reality is that he was likely a man who looked just like anyone else. A man who went to work, bought his bread, and perhaps even had a family, all while harboring a darkness that would define an era. The fog has lifted from Whitechapel. The gas lamps have been replaced by electric lights. The doss houses are gone. But the echo of those footsteps still resonates. The mystery of Jack the Ripper is not just about who he was. It is about what he represents. The ultimate unsolved puzzle. The enduring face of evil. As we conclude this deep dive into the abyss, I want you to ask yourself a question. If the evidence was presented today, with our modern technology and understanding of psychology, would we catch him? Or would the chaos of the East End still protect its darkest secret? This has been a DCF investigation. We have walked the streets, examined the bodies, and interrogated the suspects. Now, we turn the case over to you. Who do you believe wielded the knife in the autumn of 1888? Was it the barber, the teacher, or someone we haven't even named? Leave your theories in the comments below. The file is never truly closed.